Hi everyone, and welcome to the video presentation for Module 8, Interval Inversion. In this video we're going to talk about what interval inversion is, going to talk about the pattern that happens when you invert intervals. Also we'll talk about how you can use inversion to identify intervals and write intervals. So first, inversion is just the process of flipping an interval upside down. So you can do this in two different ways. One is to either move the bottom note up an octave. So we're going to take this B that's at the bottom of my major third, and I'm going to take that and raise it up an octave so that it's above the D sharp. And now we've inverted the interval. Now the B is on the top, the D sharp is on the bottom, and so the interval is inverted. You can do it the other way too. You can take the top note and move that down an octave, and it creates the same thing, just an octave lower. So I'll take that D sharp, move it down an octave, and now you can see that the D sharp is on the bottom again, and the B is on the top. So both of those intervals have been inverted. You can see that they're actually the same notes, but they have changed, so that major third is no longer a major third. It's a minor sixth. So inverting an interval does change it, but the inversion happens, the change happens according to a really specific pattern that is actually really useful to us for spelling intervals and identifying them. So the pattern of the inversion, whenever you invert something, it's always the same. So for instance, let's start with a number. So when you invert an octave, okay, if you take the bottom note of an octave or the top note of an octave and move it up an octave or down an octave, it becomes a unison. Okay, so I took that bottom F, I moved it to the top, now it's a unison. If I reversed it, it would become an octave again. So octaves always become unisons. A seventh, like I have here, if you invert one of those notes, or if you invert the interval, it will become a second. So I took the E that was on top of the seventh, I moved it down an octave, and now it's a second. So sevenths always become seconds, and vice versa, seconds always become sevenths. Okay, so a sixth, they always invert to thirds, and vice versa. So I took that F that was at the bottom, and I moved it to the top of the D, and now it's a third. And if I moved it back, it would become a sixth again. And a fifth will always invert to a fourth. So I'll take that F that was at the top, move it down an octave, now that fifth became a fourth. Okay, so that's always the pattern of the numbers when you invert an interval. Octaves become unisons, sevenths become seconds, sixths become thirds, fifths become fourth. Okay? There's actually kind of a pattern. Each of those adds up to the number 9. So an octave plus unison, so that's 8 plus 1 equals 9. 7 plus second, that equals 9. 6 plus 3, that equals 9. 5 plus 4, that equals 9. So that's just another way you can think about it. Okay, the quality follows a pattern as well. So when you invert a perfect interval, it stays perfect. So it's even, it's a perfect thing. It's not going to change when you invert it. So perfect stays perfect. Minor intervals and major intervals, they will exchange, right, when you invert. So if you invert a major interval, it'll become a minor interval. And an augmented interval, if you invert that, it becomes a diminished interval. And diminished becomes augmented when you invert it back. So that perfect unison there all the way on the left, if I invert that back, it becomes a perfect octave because it's perfect. The quality doesn't change. That minor second there, if I inverted that back to become a seventh, minor becomes major, second becomes seventh, so then this is a major seventh. Then the next interval, that's a minor third between the D and the F. So when I flip it back, that minor will become major and the third will become a sixth. So when you invert a minor third, it becomes a major sixth. And then finally, we have an augmented fourth there between F and B. And so when I invert that, my augmented will become diminished and my fourth will become a fifth. And that's what we have when we invert it back. Okay, so that's always the pattern. This is actually really not that hard to memorize because the qualities are all kind of related to each other, right? So perfect just stays the same. That's easy to remember. Minor and major, right? Those are sort of related. They're the standard ones, right? Minor or major. And then augmented and diminished, those are the weird ones, right? So they belong together too. And then the numbers, you know, they just add up to 9. So you can subtract one of them from 9 and get the number that it will invert to. So if I want to remember what a 6 inverts to, I would just subtract 9, or 6 from 9, 9 minus 6, right? And get 3. So 6 invert to 3, the third. Okay, so you really need to memorize that. It's really useful. And the reason it's useful is because sometimes we'll have to spell really ugly intervals, so weird intervals that you might not know off the top of your head, and that's perfectly fine. But inversion can be your way around it. So you always change when you want to spell an interval. So here I want to find a minor seventh below this D, okay? And so I'm not really exactly sure what that is. So if I want to spell the interval below, what I can do is just invert the name of the interval and spell it above. So instead of trying to find a minor seventh below the D, I'm going to instead find what a major second is above the D. Okay, so that's going to be an E flat. So D flat to E flat is a major second. So there is my first step to finding the answer. So since I've inverted the name, right, to find my kind of temporary interval, to get the right answer, you just invert what you wrote and you get the answer that you wanted in the first place. Okay? So inversion is a way of quickly spelling maybe unusual intervals, especially intervals that are below the given note. And in the homework, the last section, after you do the thing where you're talking about the patterns, right? You're writing in the names of the patterns. The second section has you writing intervals below a given note. And some of them are really easier, especially the sevenths and things like that. They're easier if you invert them first. Okay, so the process is just changing the name according to the inversion pattern. So in this case, minor seventh. Instead of trying to find that, I'm going to try to find a major second. Then creating that interval, right? So I created D flat to E flat. Then inverting what you just created, and that gives you the original correct answer. Okay, so the power of inversion. So that's it. It's a pretty easy concept. It's really just kind of memorizing the pattern, and that will get you out of a lot of situations. Yeah, so if you do have any questions, we're going to be going over this in the Zoom session. You can also use the discussion forum to post questions too. Other than that, have a great day, and thanks for watching.